We're an AGI company using robots to solve intelligence and general labor.
Today I'm sitting down with Bernt Bornich, the founder and CEO of 1X. Bernt and his team are building humanoid robots in one of the very few companies in the space that are completely vertically integrated.
The internet is not that big. Most people have like such a small fraction of their life uploaded to the internet. You actually globally run out of labor. You will not get there at the pace that we want to get there unless you have robots building robots.
Now, Bernt's been at this for over a decade, and their next generation robot, Neo, is expected to be commercially available later this year. They expect to be making 100,000 Neos by the end of 2027. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and remember to go direct. Excited for this one, as all you know who are listening or watching. The whole kind of premise behind Going Direct is decentralizing the real economy, and the heart of being able to do that is decentralized production. And obviously, robotics and AI are critical enablers to make this a reality. And the reason why I reached out, and thank you to you and your team for the prompt response, was you've been working on humanoids for nearly a decade. And it's a big reason why I really wanted to dig in this with you, not only with what you guys are doing, but obviously you speak about this as ever since you were a kid, you'd wanted to build robots and humanoids. So it's like a fascinating thing to me that you had this itch from such a young age. So let's start here. And I'm gonna be reading some quotes from you. I heard you say this about kind of where we are in the robotic space, and it's a very important, I think, to frame the conversation for people to understand. And you state, we're going from heavy specialized systems, i.e. a robotic arm attaching a car door in a factory, for example, to generalized systems to get scale, mass adoption, to build ecosystems. So just to level set here, can you just unpack that a little bit about where we are in the world of robotics today?
Sure. Quotes are scary. 10 years from now, someone's going to pull that up. But I think it's technology goes through these cycles, right? Where you start with like very specialized applications. It's not just for robotics, right? You can look at computing, right? It started with very specialized mainframes. And then at some point you get to where you have something that's general enough that you can start to get mass adoption and scale. And it just completely shifts the field. And that's basically where we're getting now with robotics. And humanoids is at the centerpiece of this because it is the most general system. So it is the system that you can get to the largest scale in the most general manner, which will then be the most effective system to do anything, really. Or I should meet it out of it, not anything, right? It's not going to replace classical automation, but anything that like humans do today, you can do with a humanoid. And this is really where you get into like the ecosystem and everything else getting built on top of this, because it gets to such a scale that you really get the economy of scale. You get costs down, you get reliability up. And in general, even though the system might seem overly complicated for a simple task, it's still the most efficient way to do this task. And like if you look at your computer today, right, and you're writing a document or whatever, I mean, going down to like nanometer level of like precision atom placement to make transistors to be able to write a document, it's pretty complicated compared to a typewriter. But it's still cheaper and better than a typewriter, even for just typing, because it's just produced at such an immense scale. And where we are today is kind of like the all the way in the beginning of that. And it's just progressing a lot faster than what like these kind of technologies typically have done before, right? And I think the last kind of like technology to follow this path that everyone's familiar with would probably be the smartphone. And you could like see how quickly the smartphone scaled. And like, I mean, we got 1 billion devices in like a decade, which is absolutely insane. And we see that for like every kind of like consumer-oriented technology that is groundbreaking in kind of 0 to 1, it's faster than the previous one. So it's going to be really, really exciting to see how we make this happen with wrapping hardware for humanoids, and how quickly we can drive adoption, build out the ecosystem that enables use cases across the board. And for us, of course, this is why consumer is such a big deal. It's not about consumer itself, although I'm super passionate about that. It's about getting to an abundance of labor across society. Because almost any problem we have as humanity is because we're bounded by labor. And we have a real shot at actually solving that. Like making sure labor is as abundant as we kind of see energy today. Like if you're in tech, you know that energy isn't actually abundant, right? But for most people it is. You flip the light switch and there's light and like things just work. This will happen to labor. And we're a lot closer than people think. Although it's still going to take a couple of years till we really start to see that materialize. But in a bigger picture of things, if that takes like the next 3 to 5 years, it's still like a blip in history, right? And it's going to really change what it means to be human and what we value as the most valuable human traits.
Yeah, it's this interesting thing. It's I think some people have like this doomsday view of like the robots are coming, right? And I don't know, I just have a totally like more optimistic view of this. And I just think, which is the whole premise behind why I'm doing this, it actually can enable us to bring us closer to the products that we buy and the people that make them. It just reorients everything. And so obviously you're a techno optimist on this, but it's a bummer that you hear so much negativity. I mean, you have to do it with being mindful and how you deploy, but there's just so much pessimism about it, which kind of bums me out a little bit.
I think it's like, I just want to double click on it, but it's a very interesting observation that it's the easy path, right? Like if you want to make something seem like really like high tech and cool, you make it kind of dark and dystopian. And I think it's even if you look at like arts, literature, entertainment, it's extremely rare that you find people that are so talented that they can create a really exciting story about something that's not dark. It's very rare. And like finding just like sci-fi books or sci-fi movies that have like a positive spin on kind of artificial life and like how this affects humanity. It's really rare. There's a few gems in there, but like it's really rare.
Sure.
And I think it's something I'd love to see more of.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a separate conversation, but I think humans just like the doomsday. The doomsday. They like to bask in other people's failures, and they like the doomsday stuff. But all right, so I have to bring this up because this one kind of caught my attention, and I want you to explain it. Okay, it's a recent tweet from you. Okay, and for the folks that are just listening, it says, the fleet size of 30,000 robots equals YouTube's current user upload rate. Data from humanoids containing both state and action is equal to or greater than an observation that will surpass YouTube in 2026. Okay. That one there's like, because we'll talk a lot about training data in this conversation, but that one really blew me away. So can you like just unpack that?
Yeah, sure.
Where that comes
There's
from?
some assumptions here, of course. So it's like a rough estimate, but
sure, of course.
So, I mean, if you think about like how many hours of YouTube, how many hours of video is uploaded to YouTube per hour, like the real-time rate, right? Mm-hmm. And then you think like, okay, if I have more robots than that, then those robots are actually adding more data than what YouTube is doing. And then there's a bit more than 30K, but like you have to 30% roughly of YouTube's data is duplicates.
Okay.
So like you remove duplicates and a couple of other things, and you get to about 30,000 robots. And then the second part of the quote there, it's not an it is an equal and greater than sign. That's not wrong, but it's just me trying to paint an arrow in ASCII.
Oh, okay.
So it's an arrow. So it's basically this like concept that is very important when you start to think about agentic behavior. Mm-hmm. That the internet is actually only observations, and this one is a bit hard to grasp. So I'll try to explain it. But if you think about, let's take an example of a video. It's true for everything, but like video is pretty visual, so we can explain it. So if you look at someone, I don't know, cooking in a video, right? Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like grasping for the spatula. Then you don't know, like for the next frame or next second or whatever we choose of like time unit here, what is this person going to do? Like what's the action they're trying to take? You know the result, because you can see the result of whatever action they decided to make, but you don't actually know which action they tried to take. And you don't know what was the assumptions and the model, internal model they had that this made them decide to take that action. But that's how we learn across the animal kingdom. That's how you develop spatial and temporal intelligence, which is not from language, right? The animal kingdom, including humans, even though we have language, we don't learn language first. Our understanding of the world actually comes from this spatial and temporal part. And you can, a simpler way to summarize is like bring it back to the good old scientific method, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have some assumptions, we come up with a hypothesis, we do the experiment, we observe the result. The internet only has the results. And in a video, this means you just see what the person in the video is doing, you don't know why they did it. And this is unique to robotics because you actually have the internal state of the robot. You know what it was thinking. What was the action it selected? What was the result of this action? And how did that match actually the assumption of what the robot thought would happen? And that is how you kind of like develop, let's say, cognition that is closer to how the animal kingdom works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a very interesting source of reasoning, where like kind of like the principle of reasoning naturally appears instead of being like added in post to the model. And this is something we've basically just been sinking a lot of work into, like how to use that to train what we call world models,
yep.
Which is basically a model that understands really how the world works. So it's a fully trained model that you could think about almost as a simulator. So you can have like, here's what the robot is currently seeing, here's what it's feeling. Now, if you ask it to do something, it can actually do them, and it will see what happens, feel what will happen, etc. It's kind of like the robot is in the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many applications to this which are very interesting. Of course, the obvious one is that we can evaluate. So we can like red team this and ensure safety. We can have the robot like live in the Matrix and see like what does it ever do, and like make sure we have automated tests that it always takes like safe actions. And then even more interestingly, we can of course use this to teach the robot what to do. But most interestingly, long term, we think this is the way that you actually develop general intelligence. Because when you have this knowledge encoded in the world model, you can turn it into kind of like a policy where this is what you used to think. And this is to a more large extent how humans work, right? Because we just have this incredible model of how the world works. So whenever I want to do something, I can kind of search backwards from the goal. If I'm going to grab a cup of water over here, I know what will happen as I do this. And also a lot of our lessons learned comes from just thinking things through or dreaming of all these things and like kind of searching within our own mental model. And this allows robots to do this. But most importantly, back to your original point, right? It's just like people don't quite grasp, again, I'm going to call it on this, but like how small the internet is.
Yeah, I understand.
It's not that big because most people have like such a small fraction of their life uploaded to the internet. So even though there's 8 billion people on the planet, very, very little of their experiences actually make it to the internet. For robots, all of it makes it into our data set.
Well, what you're getting at is really about observation, right? And how I think about it, right, as humans, most of what we learn through observation specifically. And just so I want to make sure I want to bring it back here. So, and this is where this data, this tweet comes from, right? What you're saying is there's so much data being put out by a fleet of 30,000 robots that it equals the basically user upload rate of YouTube because of what you just explained.
And the very important implications of that being that like a year after that again,
mm-hmm.
there will be an order of magnitude more data coming from robots than from these main sources for training from the internet, which means the data pyramid kind of flips, right? And it's no longer like everyone has access to the same data and then we compete about talent and compute. It becomes who has the biggest fleet with the most diverse data. That's the real differentiator, because you're not going to be training on the internet anymore, because the internet will be a small part of your training data. Today it's opposite, right? Our robotics data is a tiny part of our training data, and we mainly like pre-train on the internet, and then we try to transfer from the internet into robotics, which kind of works, which is kind of magical and really good, but it's a bad substitute. It's just a band-aid. It's not what you want to do. But we're kind of like just acknowledging we're in the low data regime in robotics, so we don't have a choice. We just have the internet. But then people take that and they like kind of extrapolate from that and think like, oh, that's always how it's going to be because the internet is so vast. But it isn't. You don't actually need that many robots before you have more data from robots than the internet.
All right, now you got us down now we're going down the training rabbit hole. You ready?
Yep.
So for all the reasons you just explained, I have a couple quotes from you as well that I want to make sure that I say to, this also just helps it frame it up for the audience that, you know, training is obviously one of the biggest gaps to make our droid friends work, especially in the long tail training side. So a couple quotes from you, and then I'll frame the question up. But first one is, everything is about creating the most diverse data set. That's where performance comes from. This is where intelligence comes from. And then the second one is, today's AI systems learn through peer observations. How humans learn have a lot to do with experimentation. So you touched on it a little bit, but I think it makes sense to dig deeper into this. Can you just explain to people why training for robots in the real world is so much more difficult than I guess you would say LLMs or just training on an internet data set?
Yeah, I mean, the real world is harsh, right? So first of all, it comes back to the hardware. Animals are incredibly well designed. Like evolution did such a marvelous job. And we have this ability to be very powerful and strong and very capable, but we're still soft, compliant, and extremely low energy. So if I try to, let's do simply, I try to open the door, right? I don't know quite how to do it, so I'll try a few times before I figure it out. Most likely after that experience, I know how to open the door, but also the door is probably still fine. And also I'm still fine. Like, that is non-trivial in robotics. Like, you have to build systems that are actually soft and compliant and like can conform to the world. I mean, like, one of the old heroes here said it really well. Bruce Lee, I think it was, who said like, the secret to martial arts is being like to flow, right?
Like the water.
Flow like water. And this is so true. It's the secret to life, actually, if you want to interact with things throughout the world and learn from it. You have to flow with the world. If you're trying to open a door and you decide that you know better how that door is going to move than the hinges, it will go really bad for either you or the door. And that's typically how robots work. They're very stiff systems that don't kind of like flow. And so that's one part of it. And when you have that, you can actually learn through experimentation, right? Which is how we learn. And it comes back to the same thing that, like, when you're doing experimentation, you're kind of like, you have some hypothesis of like how to achieve something, and you try it. And then you gradually figure out how to do it. That doesn't mean that kind of like learning from experts go away, which is why I like kind of like call like supervised learning, right? Whether you're using that for like training an LLM or a video model or a robot, supervised learning is kind of the same thing. You have a bunch of hands to like samples and you train on this. That's very useful, and humans do that too, because we teach each other how to do things, but that's not enough. Like I try to teach you how to do something. Now you actually have to go and do it, right? If you want to get this saying, like, if you want to get a real understanding for a task, you have to do it yourself. And that's true across intelligence in general. It's not just for like humans. And we just want to build the systems that are able to do this. But you are using both paradigms, because if not, your search space just becomes too big, right? You don't want your robot to just go around and try random stuff and hope that it does something useful. So you need both. But it is really important to be able to learn from exploration and experimentation, and that has to be designed into your hardware from start. And that takes you to the second facet of this, which, like you mentioned, diversity. And there are two things ultimately that limit your diversity. And I'll get back to why the diversity matters so much, but there's two things that will limit your diversity. It is the environment you deploy in. if you're deploying into a factory where you're supposed to be in a cage to move something from A to B every day, your diversity is going to be incredibly low. And then it's the capability of your system. Like, can you, from simple things like can you get up and down the stairs or sit down on the floor to work on the floor or stretch to work on something high, all the way to like the dexterity of your fingers and your hands, and like, can you figure out how it feels to peel a shrimp, right? Which is a pretty hard canonical robotics task. And again, we're just working very hard to ensure that we have a system that can do all of these things, because we don't want to be limited on diversity, because the diversity of the tasks that you experience is kind of directly proportional to the intelligence of the system. And this kind of like baffles me a bit, that we're like seen as a bit unique in this train of thought. But it's only in robotics that this would be unique. This is actually obvious to anyone who works in AI. There's nothing novel about it. Everyone knows that like the diversity of your data set is the only thing that matters. And then you apply compute. But a lot of people think it's just about the scale of the data and the scale of the compute. But the scale of the data is actually not a good thing. It's an artifact of having diversity. So if you've seen 100 million things in a lot of different settings, by definition, your data set will be large. Mm-hmm. But a large data set in itself of the same thing over and over doesn't help you at all. It's very obvious if you think about self-driving, right? Tesla doesn't need more data of their car driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour with nothing happening. Like it's useless. They don't actually they don't even add it to the training data. It actually hurts their performance because they have too much of that data. You need to balance out your data set. So this means you have to kind of like bring it back to first principles and say, okay, how do I get maximum diversity across my data at as large a scale as possible, as fast as possible? And I have a pretty high conviction that there's nothing that beats the consumer market to do that.
Which we're gonna get into. It's interesting. It's interesting. I've had a few other conversations with other robotics companies. They basically say when they're collecting data, they're like 90% of the data that we collect, for the exact reasons you said, it's like it's not even useful, because it's like it's the same info. Like if you have your camera and you're on an autonomous tractor in a field, and like just going down the field with nothing going on, with the same conditions don't matter. They need to light at an exact specific angle, and they need specific conditions to happen on edge cases to actually utilize that data. So
yeah, and like in everyday life, almost everything is an edge case.
Yeah, that's true.
And actually, just sorry to nerd out about this, but like one thing people really don't think about is how much of our intelligence actually comes from the social context. So much cognitive development comes from social context. So like, think about we can go super deep on this, but I'll take a simple example. If I have a coffee cup here and it's empty, do I need a refill? Or is it a dirty cup? Or do I keep my cup throughout the day and generally like don't take my cup? What's the context of this object? And it's actually socially dependent. And this is true for like almost any work we do throughout life. And I don't believe we will get to anything near human intelligence if we don't train on things in a social context. So like robots need to live and learn among people. Also, I think it's really important that they do this because we want them to understand the nuances of human life. Right? We want our robots to hold the door open for ground.
It's the social context piece is fascinating to me, because it's just like going back to what you were saying, from a robotic standpoint. It's like just scratching the surface of like actually how we live every day. So let me ask you this question. I heard you say recently that this is like kind of, to me, seems a little contradictory to what we just discussed. After you do a task 50 times, the performance does not dramatically improve. And so I kind of would think that means something different than what you just said. So if you repeat the task over and it's not dramatically improving, then what are we missing?
More diversity, obviously.
In the context of that in the context of that environment of that task?
Not really. Not really even in the context of the task, just in general. We have pretty good scaling laws on this now, showing that like as the amount of diversity increases, basically seeing the robot has seen a lot of different things, right? And tried and felt like a lot of different tasks. Learning a new task goes way faster. So you kind of see transfer between tasks. And how good you get at one specific task is kind of capped if you're only practicing that. And you'll see this actually in humans too. Like the best athletes are the ones that play the diversity of sports and then singled in on one. Like there's just you need to kind of have like a lot of like different perspectives in on a problem. Basically, you can phrase it like that. You need to have a lot of different perspectives to kind of like be able to innovate and do something well. Now, success rate on tasks is like an interesting thing that is not really well defined though, because if I'm working on a factory line sorting garbage bags, I'm a robot, and this goes pretty well, right? Now, a bag gets kind of like bumped and falls to the floor. There's different types of intelligence here, right? I just continue because I'm just blindly like repeating whatever I learned to do, kind of guided a bit by vision, but I'm just like repeating a motion. That's like classical kind of like end-to-end deep learning, machine learning, what most people are doing. Now, if you have in your training data a lot of like failure edge cases, then maybe the robot will pick up the bag on the floor. I don't see people doing this yet, but that's kind of like feasible. And at some point, if you've seen enough other things, though, you understand the task. So you're not just sorting the bags, you understand why and how this fits into the bigger picture. So when the bag drops on the floor, you'll quickly bend down, pick it up, you'll put it back where it's supposed to be. But not only that, you'll speed up for like the next 20 seconds to kind of catch up. So you're sure that you don't delay things down the line. And like this kind of understanding is kind of implicit, right? When you use human workers. And if you want to get into like proper, like large scale manufacturing, let's not even talk about sorting garbage. Let's talk about like a car factory. These things are just essential because things go wrong all the time, but we cover for it, right? And you could phrase it differently and say like that's kind of like step one we're aiming for right now, is to ensure that our robots are intelligent enough that they don't repeat motions. They deeply understand the task they're trying to do. And through that, they can just do a way better job because edge cases are kind of like solved through understanding the task instead of having just seen that specific edge case. And this allows you to generalize to edge cases you haven't seen before, which is the important part, right? Because you're never going to like, you have to cut, like in autonomous driving, they call it cutting the long tail. Like you have a long tail of like outlier experiences, like edge cases that there's no way you will ever see all of them. So at some point you need to actually get to your system to where it's smart enough to solve an edge case it's never seen before. And this happens through diversity. And the best proof of this is to look at LLMs because they're getting pretty good at it, but it's due to the diversity.
All right. Let's drill into, I want to drill into different training methods. And I want to get your perspective on this because obviously there's different trains of thought in this space around it. So, and actually this kind of came from a post I recently saw from Jim Fan over at NVIDIA. So I'm just going to run through kind of 5 or 6 different types of training. If you could kind of just give a brief, just very brief description and then kind of your perspective on it in the context of what 1X is doing. So, so world models.
Yep. That's our main thing.
And these are AI systems that learn internal models of how the world works to simulate and plan actions. And so I know you guys are going this is kind of central to your AI strategy. So can you talk about why you have such conviction on the world model side?
World model is kind of like a heavily debated what it means. So it's important to define like what we mean by a world model here because it's used in so many different aspects. But to me, what it actually is like it's what you just said. That's the start. But what it essentially is what we call like an omni model. It's the everything model. is a model that takes in all of the modalities live, right? Vision, touch, audio, direction, feelings, forces, everything. And it outputs all the same. And it outputs the same things potentially because it has such an understanding of these things and how it evolves. So at the limit, this is just the ultimate model. And you want, whether you call it like a visual language action audio model with tactile, or whether you call it a world model, it is essentially the same thing. It's like taking all of, it's kind of thing that guzzles up all your data, gives you good scaling laws, gives you good losses, and allows you to use all of this data to kind of get transfer of knowledge between modalities, right? So like you're learning how to be better at speaking through video. You're learning to be better at predicting video through audio. And like you get all these transfers between domains, right? The obvious one being like things like turn taking, right? Turn taking in a conversation is really hard with AI today. Robots are just really freaking good at this if you collect the right data, because you can see who's speaking, right? And you can also hear which direction the sound is coming from. And also, again, back to experiments and learning through experience, you have agency. So if you're wondering something, you can try something, right? You can say something and see how people react. So to me, a world model is basically just that's what it is. And then there are like current uses of world models, which is kind of what Jim talks about here, because we don't have the amount of data needed yet to kind of like get this into like called like an omni-model state. And also, we actually don't have the compute yet to just brute force use a world model as a policy. Like that would be beautiful. We just search in the world model for how to accomplish any task we want to do, and we just do that. And that actually works, by the way.
Okay.
It's just computationally not feasible. So you need to be smarter about how you kind of distill something out from a world model into a policy that's kind of like smaller and actually can run on the robot. But or even if you run it in the cloud, like the world model is still like it takes you seconds to step like milliseconds of real-time time. Like it's you can't get it to run in real time yet. But there's a world where we just scale compute and we can do that, but we're not going to do that. We're going to be smarter about it. But world model is just a very wide term, and it kind of encapsulates to me kind of like everything that is general intelligence. And then you have world models as it is applied today and how we're also applying it currently, which is a combination of evaluating our models, because it allows you to basically test your model in a world model. We can take our vision action language model and we can test it in a world model, and we can see if it's better than the previous one. And that's incredibly useful. Kind of like always is saying, right? If you solve evaluation, you solve the problem, because then you can hill climb. You can use it to do safety testing. And we can also use it to generate data, which is super useful.
How does reinforcement learning play a role in kind of your data collection process?
So first of all, it enables, so there's different layers of reinforcement learning here.
Yeah, so maybe can you just break it down as in a very basic level just for the audience so they understand what we mean by reinforcement learning?
Let's start in the bottom, right? Because look, reinforcement learning is essentially just learning by trying something and getting a reward. And then you can apply this to a lot of different things. Now we apply it to how the robot actually handles its own body. That's the bottom level, and we will work our way upwards. So like, how do I walk? How do I run? How do I sit in a couch? How do I crouch? All these things, right? But it extends past that for us. That's where it starts, right? But we've extended this pretty far. So now it extends kind of to like, okay, if I'm carrying a 25 kilogram like sandbag, I'm still able to walk. Or if I'm trying to pull open a really heavy spring-loaded door, I understand that I need to take my other hand and like brace myself while I'm pulling. Or I need to widen my step to really like lean back and use my momentum to pull. All these things. And all the way up to where this is starting to extend into like, how do I handle dexterous manipulation? How do I not just grasp something, but even just like use in-hand manipulation to do things? And like, these things are learned extremely well through reinforcement learning because they're very hard to demonstrate. Like, if you want to transfer this knowledge from a human, it's really hard because now you need to have a human that, for example, has sensors that track as well as the robot. But even more than that, you need actual haptic feedback on the other side that tells you the same kind of state as the robot, right? So the robot has like fine-grained, like tactile, for example, right? And transferring that to a human so you can use expert demonstrations is really hard. So that's kind of like one way we use reinforcement learning. Now, again, the search space can be like incredibly big. So we do use some expert human demonstrations to guide the system, typically called like some reference trajectories. So you'd have like, hey, the solution is probably like somewhere within this set of trajectories or between them somewhere, like explore within this space, but then it figures out how to do this. Now, the beauty of this is that since you're exploring so many states, it's extremely robust. So typically you have this problem in general, it's not just robotics, but it's very visible in robotics that you get kind of like what we call off distribution. So your model goes to somewhere it's never seen before, and then it has no idea what to do. And then you need to figure out some smart way to ensure that if this happens, you always get like back on distribution, like the distribution of your data, right? Again, why diversity matters. So reinforcement learning is really good at handling this because it explores this huge amount of initial states and brings you back to what you want to do. So it works really, really well. Now, we also have kind of like a top-down reinforcement learning thing, which is very interesting, which is I asked the robot, like, I have a robot in my home, right? And it works in kind of like two different ways. It works in the teleoperation way, which is not just teleoperation. There's a lot of autonomy involved to make it more efficient, but where I just schedule on my app, like, hey, and today, for example, I've just scheduled like that while I'm at work now, the robot should tidy, it should vacuum, clean a bit, and it's going to do a set of my white laundry. So when I come home, all this is done. And it's done through a mix of automation and teleoperation. When I'm home, it runs in what we call companion mode, which is kind of like best effort autonomy. So I talk to the robot, and that's amazing. It's like I said, I can be really good at that. Then I can also ask it to just go grab me a Coke in the fridge. And right now, about half the time, it will come back with one.
What happens the other half of the time?
And the other half, I'll go figure out what the heck happened. And again, like graceful failure and compliance, safety, all these things become so important, right? And that's
Sure.
a hardware thing. It's not a software problem. But the robot fails really gracefully. So like I'll go and find like it failed and like it somehow got lost and did something else. Maybe it's looking out the window and I'm like, Neo, what are you doing? You're supposed to get me a Coke. But actually what's incredibly interesting is that in both of these cases, we have data that can self-improve. Because we're able to auto-label, like again, a reward function, right? So we can like tell the robot whether it succeeded or failed on this task. And then it can get better. And interestingly enough, the failure data actually is more valuable than the successes.
Just so like life. Just like life.
Yeah, it is, right? So that's also reinforcement learning in a sense. So it's applied kind of like broadly across the stack because it's just like whenever you can like experiment with something and have a reward function, you apply reinforcement learning. But I do think increasingly it is like the end state of all things, right? But you need a lot of other things to come to get there. And I have a pretty like canonical example which I love. If you think about our world model, right, it's an incredibly good video generator. So because it understands physics really well, it understands the world, it needs to be able to visualize how the world would look to the robot. So let's say in the future, like a Hollywood producer is making a video with our video model for the next Hollywood blockbuster, and he calls me and he's like, hey, like I have a couple of my characters like walking into the sunset on the beach and it's beautiful. Something's off with the sand. It's not moving correctly around their feet. And I'll just say like, hey, I see here I have 62 Neos not doing anything right now. Go to the beach and shuffle your feet. And problem gone, right? And long term, I'm just like, I think it's incredibly interesting that like you can build a data engine where you actually have an agency to direct it. It's not just like a passive like input stream of data. you can actually go and say like, hey, I don't have these things in my distribution. Go fix it. And I do think in the future, like if generally our robots struggle with picking up pens, a lot of our robots who have nothing else to do, they'll just be fiddling with a pen.
To learn. That's interesting. Can you just explain very briefly what teleoperation is? Does that go away as the training, some of the training gaps get solved?
Yes and no. It's very good that you asked that question. I think we should rename teleoperation.
We should what? Sorry?
We should rename teleoperation.
What should it be named?
Labeled data. There's no difference between teleoperation and labeled data in general. It's just what it is. It's expert demonstration. It's labeled data for supervised learning. And when you're training like a robot model or an LLM, you have a lot of labeled data. And if you phrase it like that, then your question of does it go away kind of becomes mute, right? Because even today with LLMs, clearly they're gathering labeled data. You profile your model, you look at where like people aren't happy with what it's doing, you gather some more labeled data on how to fix that, and in the next checkpoint is better. And I think like 10 years from now, you'll still be doing that. It'll be less and less, but like, I'm not sure it ever goes away. And I'm not sure there's like even a goal for this ever to go away. Maybe ultimately, like if you actually have reinforcement learning in the real world at scale, and we have billions of robots, you get to where like, why would I go do that manually as a human? Like robots will just figure out what's wrong. But I do think for the next years, this will not go away.
Okay.
But of course, we won't scale teleoperation linearly with scaling the robot fleet. That does not work at all. But it doesn't go away.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, because you could always imagine, like you said, there's always going to be things to improve, and there's always going to be more edge cases to train on. It just never ends at some point, right? Because I'm not as familiar with this, but the next kind of training method is sim to real or real to sim. Mm-hmm. So can you just kind of break that down and kind of say how does that play a role in kind of how you guys look at training at 1X?
Sure, it does, because we don't have data. Or we have data, we don't have data. I mean, we're training on language from the internet. We're training on images. We're training on video. We're training on unique data set that we have gathered on human point of view video with audio and everything. We're training in simulation. It's not what we want to do, but it's very useful. And it gets you to where your robots do useful enough things that you have enough robots out there doing useful enough things that you have enough data that you don't need to do this anymore. So I don't think like long-term that this will play a major role, to be honest. Okay. I do think it's going to play a huge role in bootstrapping our way to a large enough data flywheel that you don't need it anymore.
Got it. Okay, so if you were to start if I came to you and said, "Hey, I want to start a services company. I want to help you solve the training problem." Well,
get in line. I don't know. We have like 2 companies a week or something now. Like
is that it? Yeah. And so, from your perspective, though, like what is the most useful for 1X to help solve some of these problems? If you're going to like look to an external provider to help you do with this.
I think it's really hard, and like it's the curse of what we're doing. And I think maybe also we're just like tragically bad at this. Like as a company, we have a tendency to like do absolutely everything ourselves, and down to like like there's this expression of like being stupidly vertically integrated. And I mean, we're like we have patents on new ways to age die-cast aluminium for like a world record in strength to weight. We do like lots of material science. We do the manufacturing equipment ourselves and automation. We do the motors. We do the synthetic tendons for like the tendon drives. We do all the power electronics, batteries, the mechanics, even the camera, like all the sensors. We have novel patented tactile, which works in a principle that no one else is doing, which in our opinion is better. And I just realized this morning that we have vertically integrated swag. Like this is not just printed because our design team like felt like all the shirts were bad quality. So this is like custom woven for us. I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask that question.
Understood. Well, but I think this is actually a good transition into kind of more specifically 1X approach to humanoids, which is obviously you are completely vertically integrated, as you said, and you control your own supply chain. But why is it so important in this space in your mind?
Well, I think from first principles is just when I started this a decade ago, it's like, okay, people don't realize this, but like there was really good robots back then. Like Honda Asimo was running across stage, walking up and down stairs, and handing someone a bottle 15 years ago. And I'd say that robot was better than most of the things that are out there today.
I've seen that video.
You got to start by thinking, okay, why didn't that work? And the honest answer is that it's just from a first principles, like that system is very stiff. It's like a very high energy, stiff, classical industrial robot put into humanoid form. And that doesn't work so well outside of like a lab and a YouTube video because it needs to make a lot of assumptions about the world. It needs to know roughly when it's going to touch something, for example, to slow down before it touches something. Because there's such an enormous amount of like energy in the motion that you have to like slow down just before you hit the ground. Right? Like a lot of these things, which has been a problem for also the robots that are built today. And then the cost $4 million per unit. And to a large part, that's because the components used in that, like the harmonic drives, the type of motors, the force torque sensors, like all these things, they're very expensive. So then ask yourself, should I build a robot based on those things? And the answer might be yes, right? Because you could think like, okay, but I'm going to build humanoids, I'm going to build 1 billion of them. So like these components are expensive because we don't have humanoids yet. And then you look at the components and you see like, well, that's not actually true. Like we produce like tens of millions of these each year already because they're using industrial robots. Patents expired, so they're mainly produced in China without patent licensing fees, and they're still this expensive. Then you go a bit deeper and you look at like the first principles and you see like, oh, they require very special alloys, very, very precise machining. Like, let's them go down there, right? And then you figure out that the supply chain for humanoids doesn't exist. Like if you build if I was building an electric car company, right? I'd say like a car is kind of like a car. I'll innovate on the drivetrain and battery and power electronics. I don't need to innovate on like the suspension system, right? But there is no supply chain for humanoids.
Yeah.
And if you follow the old one, you'll end up with what you see around you, right? With like robots weighing 200 pounds, being very expensive, being very stiff and like not safe, energy inefficient, and that's not going to get you to the scale we're looking at here. You actually have to really innovate on like every single like tier in the supply chain. So it started there. Now today I could like pretend we're super smart and we knew that like global supply chain would be a huge problem and geopolitics would play a large part in this and blah blah blah. But of course we didn't know that back then. We just saw that like, hey, we have to solve this from first principles because we're going to build robots that are safe because they have to live and learn among people. And we're going to make robots that are just very manufacturable and affordable, which means they need to be very lightweight. They need, because like if 200 pounds of aluminium is a lot more expensive than 60 pounds of aluminium. They need to not use special alloys, and you need to build it in a manner where you don't need very tight tolerances or anything like this, and where just the number of components is as low as possible. Like, but get the part count down, get rid of as many sensors as possible by just using smarter ways of building your system.
You said that this probably just reinforces what you're saying, but I want to make sure when I get to this, which is you said that you took the right approach to technology beginning back in since the beginning, or maybe you said 2019. I don't know if I have that correct. Despite most people doubting it. So can you explain to me specifically, when you say from the beginning your approach to technology you feel is correct, what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the way back to the beginning, 2015.
2015. Okay.
But it wasn't by accident. It was because I'd been in the field for 10 years. And I sat down and I thought really hard about it. Okay, if I'm going to do this, what is actually, from first principles, the biggest problems today? How do we make sure we solve them? Like, we don't want to build one more thing of the thing everyone else is building, because we know that that doesn't work. How do we, like, it looks really cool, but like it doesn't actually work. How do you build something that actually works? And I think it was really good timing, right? Because we had a decade to develop this, because it takes a long time to innovate on these kind of things. Like, hardware is hard. And when people say hardware is hard, they're usually talking about integrating a bunch of off-the-shelf components. Like, developing all of these components, where like each of these components could have been a company in itself, right?
Sure.
Serving into the supply chain. It takes a lot of time. And we had the time to do so because we were very early. And then we were very good in realizing very early that like the classical approaches to robotics is not going to cut it. Like, there's no way to scale. There's no way to kind of like solve the general problem through like programming your way out of this. It has to be learned. Which really brought us to the robots need to be able to live and learn among people. And we need to follow like a complete end-to-end learning approach. And we did that a lot sooner than everyone else, like years before everyone else. And this allowed us to make choices on the hardware side that the other companies couldn't really make, right? Because if you follow the more classical approach to robotics for how to control a humanoid instead of the learning approach, you need your robot to be very, very stiff and very like accurate and all these things, so that like if you say A, it does A exactly, because you're like pre-computing what it should do. But when you use learning, you don't need to do that at all, because the learning can kind of capture the dynamics of the system. And it's very interesting parallel to nature here, right? Because there is a reason that every animal learns how to use its body. It's not part of your instincts, basically. It has to be learned. And this is because every body is slightly different. But that's fine, because you learn how to operate it. So they don't all need to be exactly the same. And we apply this principle to robotics. And this really helps you, right? You just think about it from a manufacturing point of view. Every robot doesn't need to be exactly the same, because it learns how to use its body. Like, that's a huge advantage.
I could go with hours for you with you on this, but because you're going to be going.
Well, I can do two of you. So
Can you?
twice as good.
Oh.
I think it's just two of your clients in the app. So like I see the same picture stuff.
You talk a lot about and the importance of your hardware being safe, right? If robots are going to live with and among humans, and it's something that just caught my eye when you look at Neo and what your team is building versus Figure and Tesla and even Unitree, and that's just some of the features of the robot. So I just wanted to dig into that a little bit. Just a couple of things that I thought were interesting. Neo weighs 66 pounds. There's no pinch points, very low energy in motion, and the entire robot is soft. So can you explain to me why, because you guys have gone really far in that direction around safety versus the other companies. So just explain to me the importance of that.
Well, I think like mainly it doesn't need explanation, right? It's the most important thing you do. Make sure robots are safe.
Then why aren't they doing it? But like, why don't you think that they're doing that then?
You have to ask them. I do sincerely hope though that they're careful, and I see that some people are not. Like I kind of die a bit inside every time I see like some of these robots like playing with kids or like praying like nothing goes wrong. I think as a field, we just have this huge responsibility to behave well, play well with regulators, preempt these things, and ensure safety. First of all, we just don't want to hurt anyone. Second of all, it could really set the field back. Like, look at what happened to autonomous cars, right? Because this was not handled well. So I do think like safety is paramount. It is the most important thing. Now, I would say for like, if you look at Tesla and Figure, they're a bit more responsible. I haven't actually seen them like be very close to people, and they treat the robot with respect because it is a dangerous machine.
Sure.
So they're more like selecting a different market, right? They're saying like, hey, we're going to be in factories and like we're not going to be around people. We're going to do more like classical industrial automation in a slightly more general form factor that allows us to do more. I think that can build a good business. Like we're an AGI company using robots to solve intelligence and general labor, which is a different play, right? Where we're not really playing the same thing. But I do think what they're doing might become a really good business. It's useful.
Sure. Last question, then we'll do a quick rapid fire, and then we can wrap up. This goes into what you just mentioned. You made this comment: if we want intelligent, I'm going to read this quote. If we want intelligent humanoids all over the place doing labor, in your mind, the approach is first you need to go through the home, then into the work and industrial environments. So explain to me kind of your view on kind of why you've taken that approach, and you were just discussing the alternative approaches. So
yeah, so again, it's back to what we talked about diversity to solve the general problem, right? There's this trap in robotics, and we've been in it, by the way, because we deployed our previous humanoid Eve into the industry 3 years ago, and we decided to take a step back, retract the product, and do Neo and consumer because of this, which is just, like I said, like the robot learns for like 20 to 40 hours and it stops learning. So you don't really get to solve the general problem. You get to solve a very narrow problem. And this means you end up solving that narrow problem for every single customer. And then there's edge cases, and now you have to fix them because your customer is unhappy. And then you become a robot integrator or a consultancy company instead of a product company. That's absolutely not what we want to do. We want to stay in consumer. And when I say consumer here, think about it like in a broad term. We're going to stay in like general markets where we're not doing enterprise deals for long enough that we basically have a robot that can prompt engineer the real world. There's no adaptation of the product to solve other tasks or other verticals. You buy one, you show what to do, it does the thing, you're a happy customer. That's when we expand into these markets. And of course, we're going to be very selective about which markets we go for, because again, we're here to achieve our mission. We want to get to an abundance of labor. And an abundance of artificial labor means building a lot of robots.
A lot of them.
That means, but like, if you think through this, there's some very interesting, like simple things. Like you get to about 1 billion robots, and you're starting to have significant percentages of the world's aluminum refinement going into your robots. But even more importantly, you would run out of labor. If you look at the iPhone ramp, if that was a humanoid, let's assume like rough numbers that a humanoid spends 5 times as much assembly time as an iPhone. There's just not enough labor. Like Apple ran out of labor. They were displacing large parts of China, like moving groups of the population around. And then they had to expand into India and Vietnam. They ran out of labor. If you multiply that by 5, you've actually globally run out of labor. You will not get there at the pace that we want to get there unless you have robots building robots. So for us, manufacturing is robots building robots. For infrastructure build-outs, to us, that's robots building energy infrastructure, chip fabs, data centers for training. And of course, we will do all other things across society as part of like the artificial labor, but we do have a desire to focus on the things that can accelerate our own growth path.
What do you need help with today? Like, what are you struggling with most? Or if someone were to come to market saying, hey, there's a big gap here, we need this to help move the field forward, what would it be? Does anything come to mind?
Passionate early adopters.
On the customer side?
Yeah, like when we're very transparent here. When we're launching this, and we're very soon, We're very close to this. It's not perfect. Like it's more like it's really a transformational technology. It's a 0 to 1, and you want to be a part of this. You want to be the first one to have this, right? You want to adopt a Neo into your family and help teach it. It's going to be a heck of a lot of fun, and we're going to treat you really well. It will be useful, but it's not perfect yet. It'll get better every day, and we're going to develop it together. And we need those people, and we need their patience, and we need their data. We're going to do it on your terms, right? Privacy is super important. I mean, we want to make sure you're in control, but we need that data to make the product better. And yeah, I just can't wait to like start working with all of these customers and figuring out how the product is used and seeing how this develops.
That's cool. And when are you? Just to give the people a sense of timing, when is that rollout, or when is the initial rollout?
This year.
Okay. I won't talk about your scaling plans because you've spoken about that a bunch on other conversations. So, all right, you ready for some rapid fire that we can wrap up?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Excuse me. Sorry. What's one myth about robotics you wish would die?
That they will take over society.
What's the most overhyped narrative in AI or robotics today?
That you can get to general ASI or super intelligence by just training on the internet.
What's the biggest misunderstanding the public has about humanoids?
That's a hard one. It's so split. I think large parts of the population think that this is like way better than it is, and they like see some artificially generated video on YouTube of like a humanoid that's just like, I don't know, doing kung fu and peeling a shrimp while doing it, and they're like, oh man, like the robots are taking over. It's like no one's near to that level yet. And then you have the other part of the population that when they meet a robot the first time, they're like, what just happened? I thought this was like decades out. But yeah, I think like you have both sides.
If you weren't building robots, what would you be doing?
Trying to understand biology at a fundamental level. I feel like if like aliens landed tomorrow, this is a quote, by the way, I don't remember who said this. It's in the book, but like if aliens landed tomorrow and you go in there and you're like, what does technology, and you ask them like, what does technology look like in a million years? What's the pinnacle of technology humanity will achieve? They would just show you biology. It's just like we're so far away from understanding even like the basics. Like, yeah.
What sci-fi movie got robots the most right?
Robot and Frank.
How about who got it completely wrong?
Blade Runner.
Who else should I talk to going direct about embodied AI?
Ross Tedrick.
Where how can people reach out to you, or how do they get in touch?
Message me on X, I guess.
Cool. And last one for you. Leave us with one bold prediction. Anything you want.
Robots will be surprisingly useful way before people thought they would. Won't be perfect, but it will be surprisingly useful.
Great. Well, thank you, my man. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to following the Neo rollout, and hopefully we'll check in several months and see where you guys are at.
Awesome. Amazing questions, and really enjoyed it. Have a good one.
Cool. Thanks, man.